Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a pleasant August 4th here in suburban Chicago. Temperatures in, I would say, the low 70s or even high 60s Fahrenheit, which means this feels more like mid-September than mid-August. Normally August is a roasty, toasty day, and this is downright cool. Love it. It's a nice cool wave coming through. So it is a little windy though, so apologies for wind noise on the microphone, but that's what you get when you sign up for this podcast. Makes it sound like I'm punishing you or something. I just mean, sorry about the wind. So today is the 6th and final episode for a while in which I work from a list of mechanisms mentioned by people in the podcast guild and talk about the results of those mechanisms. Next episode, I will talk about the top of the stack for August, which is a few days late here, but I wanted to finish this series. Then I already have some other stuff planned. So today we're going to be talking about 3 mechanisms mentioned by the group. I kind of left these till the end because I really like them all. So there's a lot to say. So I'm going to jump right into it. The first of these is variable player powers. This is a wide open category. There are lots of different games that use some form of variable player powers. So lots of room to negotiate with it. But as I was thinking about it, and I think about what game is my favorite that uses variable player powers, I really wanted to think about what is a game where variable player powers is the center point of the game, or a crucial piece of it. So part of me is tempted to use games where you pick your player power each round, but that almost drifts into action selection. But so something like Radis or Citadels, in both of these games, you choose which power you're going to have in a given round, and then using that power is a big part of what you're doing. In fact, the only way that you have special powers. So that's not really what I'm looking for. When I read variable player powers, I presume that to mean that we are looking at a game where I have one power and you have another. Asymmetric player powers might be a better way to understand it, as opposed to, I suppose another way to interpret the word variable would be to suggest that it's a game where the player powers that you have change during the game. Like in Radis or Citadels, the powers you have change as you go along. This isn't really the definition I was using, though I can't be sure that isn't the actual definition. It could be, just not the one I'm using. So I'm looking at games where the power you have is the one you have and it shapes how you play is a crucial part. I thought about something like Terraforming Mars, where every player does have a thing they do, but I consider that a kind of faction ability, which is part of variable player powers, but I find that isn't the core of the game. Like when I think of Terraforming Mars, I don't say to myself, ooh, what I love about Terraforming Mars is that each corporation has a slightly different power. I mean, it's nice. It's a good part of the game. But it isn't the heart of the game to me. The same goes for Anachrony. In Anachrony, each faction gets its own power. There are lots of games. Clans of Caledonia. I would say these do roughly fit the variable player powers category. They don't fit for me. So what games am I thinking of? I would say Cerebria also falls in that category of you have a special power that you use, but you basically play the same whichever, or you play very similarly given whichever spirit you take. Really, the variable player powers just give you a nudge in a direction. So, what are some games where I think it does really shape the gameplay? Ex Libris, actually, is another one where it feels like there are faction powers, but I would suggest that the gameplay in Ex Libris is so light. Hey, how's it going? Oh wow, just ran into a friend who I used to see at the gym where my son is a gymnastic. We used to do gymnastics ninja class, but in the before times. So hi Eric, if you started listening. Okay, so back to, we were talking about variable player powers, and I was talking about games where the variable player powers seemed significant enough to be part of it. So Ex Libris is the game I was talking about, and I think that one's an interesting choice. This is a game about building a library shelf and putting the books on it in order. And I think that game is interesting as a game with variable player powers because so much of it is determined by the variable player power you take. When I've played that, I've found if you don't lean into the special power you have, it's very difficult to win the game. That you really need to take the most advantage of it that you can. I would say in my experience, it's also the game that's by far the most unbalanced in terms of those special player powers, which is why it wouldn't be higher on my list. But we actually, in my family, we've divided the pile of player powers into strong powers and weak powers because it's so unbalanced. If you get a strong power and your opponent gets a weak power or whatever. But Ex Libris is one I would consider with regard to that. Another one I would say is Ghost Stories. Ghost Stories is a game where each player has their thing that they do, and it succeeds for having a really tight action economy. You can only do 2 actions on your turn. One of them is move, and one of them is do a thing. You can either banish a ghost, or you can use the power of the space that you're on. Each character has some sort of special power that they can do, and you have to really maximize those, because each player's special power is so important, because you can only do one thing on your turn and move once on your turn. So the game really is very tight in terms of what you can do, and if you aren't maximizing those player powers, it's really important. So that is a game where I would really strong. And again, asymmetric player powers is kind of how I've defined this, rather than player powers that change. Another game that I was thinking of was Res Arcana, because each player has a character power that they start with that's really important. But again, I don't know, that doesn't feel like the heart of the game. That particular piece of it. Boy, what other games would I point to as having really interesting variable player powers? Oh, one I think of is Harry Potter, the Harry Potter deck building game. In that one, maybe that is one where the variable player powers are really important. So there are 5 different characters you can be, and you can play, I think, as few as 2 characters, but you need to bring, we've always played with 4. But there's 5 because you could be Luna. You could be Harry, Ron, Neville, Hermione, and Luna. And as we got into the higher player count game, or as we got into the higher level games of that game, we found that you really had to lean into your player power in order to succeed. If you weren't just honing your deck to be the perfect thing to complement who you are, you'll lose, because the game is really brutal. We also found, and this was sort of frustrating, we also found that the Harry Potter deck builder game benefited heavily from very selective buying, which most deck builders are fun because you buy new cards and put them in your deck and they're awesome. In the Harry Potter game, if you buy a new card every round, you will lose on the higher levels because a lot of the cards that you buy don't help your particular skill. And so unless you're amplifying your particular expertise, there's a good chance that it won't help. Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle is a really good variable player power one. The last one I was thinking about is Small World. Now, Small World fits that other one in terms of player powers that you take and then you get new ones. But I would put it into the same categories as these other ones I've talked about, because the player powers that you get, you keep for several turns. It's not like Citadels or Radus where you get the player power for one turn and then someone else takes it the next turn, like action selection. I feel like Small World, you get the power that you get and then you have it for a while. If you haven't played Small World, it's a really interesting area control game with pretty simple mechanisms and a neat twist where you have these powers and these races, and the races all have their own power as well. And so each round or game, whatever, each group that you take, you're going to have a race and a power. And the combination of those two things is good or bad. And you play them for a little while, but then as the race declines, you retire them, you decline them, or I forget what the word for it is, and then you pick a new one. And having done so shapes your fortunes pretty significantly. It's a really interesting game and fits actually kind of both definitions of both asymmetric player powers, because you have the power that you took when you recruited a race, but also that it changes as the game goes along because you take different races. I might have to say that Small World is my favorite game with variable player powers. The ones I've talked about. Ghost Stories is a very close second. But I think I'm going to say Small World. All right, on to our second mechanism of the day, tableau building. I don't know for certain, but I might say tableau building is my favorite game mechanism. Now, tableau building, of course, is very closely related to engine building. Engine building games often use cards or use sets of workers in particular ways or other things, whereas tableau building particularly involves taking things in various ways, either buying them or drafting them and putting them in front of you, and then those things shape how your game plays. So tableau building and engine building are often very closely overlapped, but not necessarily the same. But I think that it's the taking things and putting them in front of me and then being able to use them in ways that make me feel smart, I really like. So in that regard, it seems like the epitome of that is the epitome of drafting games, something like Seven Wonders. Seven Wonders is a brilliant tableau building game where you have all of these things in front of you and they give you resources that allow you to do better. The same goes for It's a Wonderful World. But I would say while these are both interesting tableau builders, the tableaus themselves are pretty minimal, that you don't really have to interact with them much after you've put them in front of you. Unlike some other games, when you put a card in a tableau in Seven Wonders, you don't really have to think about it or use it very carefully thereafter. Sort of more in the middle line of that are something like Everdell, which Everdell is pretty interesting because you're building a tableau. You have a limited number of cards, so the limits of the tableau system are a significant part of what you're doing as you build it. But you also have to think carefully about how you want to use the tableau. There are a couple places where, like after the first round, all your green cards trigger again, so the game has mechanisms that influence your use of those green cards. There are goals that you can take that work once you've gotten a variety of cards or a certain number of a certain kind of card. So the set collection element of shaping your tableau is really important. There are cards that trigger off other cards in your tableau, so there's a lot of interaction with it. Some of the cards have worker placement spaces on them, so thinking about when to play those and how to make the best use of those, especially the ones where you can use them and put stuff on them and then trigger them again. There's some really interesting tableau building elements in Everdell. Another game that feels that way is Netrunner. And I feel like Netrunner, being a living card game where you are doing deck construction and deck piloting is such a big deal, the tableau in Netrunner doesn't feel as significant, but it is really significant. But I still don't think of it as a tableau game. But I wanted to mention it because the way the Netrunner functions there is really important. Another game that I think is maybe the most pure tableau builder I know is Res Arcana. Res Arcana is a really interesting card game because it is so tight. What Tom Lehman did in designing Res Arcana is to pick a very minute, finely tuned set of cards, and you just get a few of them and you use them multiple times through. But unlike deck builders, you don't get more cards. You just have the 8 or so that you got, and you can play most of them. You can play them in front of you and they'll do stuff, or you can use them to generate resources, in which case then they aren't in front of you and you have to sort of cycle them through again. But building the tableau in a way that allows you to accumulate the points you need to win in Res Arcana is really tight. It is perhaps the most distilled tableau builder I've played. Contrast that with Matainai, which I see as the other end of the tableau builder spectrum. Matainai, for those of you who are regular listeners, you'll know that Matainai is my best in brand Carl Chuddik multi-use card game. I like Matainai better than Glory to Rome, although I've only played Glory to Rome once and I can see the value in it. I like it better than Innovation, although I can see the value in Innovation as well. I feel like you have a little more control over what you're doing in Matainai. Innovation, it feels a little bit too random. And Impulse is good too, but I think Matainai is better. Now, Matainai is certainly about building and manipulating your tableau. You have 4 places you can put cards. When you put them down, you put them into particular places. It's all about moving cards around and having them in the right spot at the right time to earn you points. But it's as much hand management and resource management as it is tableau building. In part because it's about moving cards to particular spaces more than accumulating a set of things in front of you. So Matainai and Res Arcana are both definitely in the running there. The other 2 games that I would point to as I think having a significant tableau building element are Anachrony and Terraforming Mars. Now, Anachrony, it's less as a tableau builder because so much of what you're doing is generating resources and interacting with the big board. But a big part of what makes the game run well is when you build the buildings in your colony and you recruit workers to be able to use those buildings without your superpower suits. The interplay of trying to figure out how to make those buildings function and build an engine out of those buildings is really compelling. It makes Anachrony really fun. That said, it feels the least like a tableau builder of the games I've mentioned here. Again, by contrast, Terraforming Mars is the tableauiest of tableau builders. It is a really compelling system. It allows you to build an engine if you're using a lot of the blue or green cards. It allows you to accumulate resources and play things onto the map and do sort of achievement cards. But all of these involve laying out cards that have symbols, and then the other cards will feed off the symbols that were on the cards that you laid out. And if I have to pick one mechanism that Terraforming Mars fits in, be it drafting, as Chris Hickman suggested, there's elements of area majority or area control, there's elements of resource management, but for me, it is a tableau builder first and foremost, and I think it's really, really good. So, in the running, we've got Everdell, we've got Matainai, we've got Res Arcana, we've got Terraforming Mars. It's got to be Terraforming Mars. There you go, Terraforming Mars, my favorite tableau building game. That brings us to the final and perhaps most obvious of the mechanisms for us to discuss on this podcast, and that would be the pick up and deliver mechanism. Pick up and deliver is, of course, an element in a game where you are supposed to move or connect to a place, pick up a thing, move it somewhere else, and deliver it. So a significant element of pick up and deliver games is management of time and efficiency of routes, efficiency of moving objects around. Now, my first instinct when I thought of this, what games do I have that are pick up and deliver games, was Kings of Air and Steam. This is the game you heard about a lot last year because it was on my 10 for 10, and we completed, I think, 8 games of it in December. That's a really fun game. I like it a lot. I think the nuances of the gameplay are interesting. There's a really great press your luck element in terms of if you think you can get to a place and do a thing before your opponents do. Works really well. So definitely in the running for me, Kings of Air and Steam, just for experience. But there are a number of other pick up and deliver games that I have played. Pandemic Legacy Season 2, for instance, is a pick up and deliver game where Season 1, the traditional Pandemic, was not. Because in the traditional Pandemic, you're supposed to be removing cubes, and in Pandemic Legacy Season 2, you're placing cubes. I don't think I've ruined anything by revealing that because it's a pretty minor plot point that's revealed in the rulebook. But yeah, in Season 2, you're placing cubes more than removing cubes, and so it becomes a pick up and deliver game. And while I enjoyed Season 2 quite a bit and heartily looking forward to Pandemic Legacy Season 3 or Season 0. It's not the bee's knees. Then we have Clank. Clank is a pick up and deliver game, sort of, because you go get a treasure and bring it out of the cavern. But I don't really think of it that way. If the delivery is just you survive the game, that doesn't feel like... I think a pick up and deliver game ought to have multiple deliveries. Delivering should be part of the game as well, not just pick up and return. I guess in that regard, pick up and survive, the games Forbidden Island and Forbidden Desert, and to a degree Forbidden Sky, but I don't recall if that one has it, are pick up and deliver games, because you have to get the things and bring them to a place. But again, if you're just bringing them to the end of the game and you win when you perform the delivery, it doesn't really feel like pick up and delivery to me. Particularly if the pickup is not clear from the beginning. In Forbidden Island, you're searching for a thing, and then when you find it, you're on your way to winning. So One game, however, that does fit that mold to me is Century Eastern Mountain. So in Century Eastern Mountain, you do the trading like you did from Century Golem, but you do it using spaces on the board, and the spaces on the board depend on... It involves picking up the gems and moving them to other places to be able to make the trades. And it's like that trade-off works really well for me, and I think fits the model pretty well. And I like Century Eastern Mountain quite a bit, but the other people that I've played it with weren't quite as hot on it. They didn't think it was quite as neat as I did, and it didn't get the kind of play that Century Golem Edition has. Even after we got Eastern Mountain, Golem Edition still gets more play. So, and I still haven't managed to play the double game where you're playing both at the same time. So, and then, there's a number of space games that I haven't actually played that fit this model. So like Merchant of Venus, I know is a pick up and deliver game. Firefly has elements of that. Xia Legends of a Drift System has elements of that. These are all games that have pick up and deliver mechanisms, but that aren't, that I haven't played. So they're not going to be on my list. So with that considered, all of those options there, I think that in the end, I'm going to say Kings of Air and Steam. It's maybe too predictable to say the pick up and deliver game that I've played the most is the one I like the best, but maybe those go together. Or maybe it's just not a mechanism I've explored very much. I will admit that the name of this podcast comes from the practicalities of making it and what I thought of as a clever pun more than a particular delight in this mechanism. So there I go. Kings of Air and Steam is my answer to that question. And with that, I've reached the end of part 6 of the games I like best for each mechanism as requested by people in the guild. First Nick Shaw, and then Chris Hickman, and then the rest of the guild. Thank you all for participating in the conversation there. I hope you'll follow up this episode with more conversation about those mechanisms. Hop over there and give us your list of the 20 or so mechanisms I've talked about in these 6 episodes and what your favorite games are in each of those. I will be back next time with the top of the stack, probably tomorrow. I hope that you are staying happy and healthy and getting some games in here in the strange world we're living in right now. I appreciate you all taking a listen, and hey, if you know somebody who you think might like the podcast, why not recommend it? It would be fun to have some more people around the guild to see some more downloads in my weekly stats. Thanks for listening, and I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Take care. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.